Welcome to the Michelle Rempel Garner podcast.
Hello, fellow patriots. Today, we're going to talk about the future. And joining me to talk about the future is veteran political strategist and my chief of staff, Sean Schnell. The future.
Yes, there's a lot to talk about, and I think I want to dive right into it here because you created quite a bit of conversation this week. You had a lot to talk about, and I thought it would be good for us to talk a little bit about that today. So let me jump right into it. You wrote a piece this week, and I'm going to throw the screenshot up here for people to see, called "Where Do We," and you put in brackets, the Conservative Party, go from here. And this is on your Substack, which if people aren't signed up for, they should subscribe so that they get pieces like this from you and information that they can get directly to their inbox. But you wrote this piece, "Where do we, the Conservative Party, go from here?" And it elicited a lot of reaction. There was a lot of people. I've got a few screenshots here from folks that are talking about it. Your colleague Alex Ruff said, talking about the piece, that there's no they in the political movement, you and we. And yes, most of the time, no matter what the political stripe, there's a lot of adaptability, creativity, and courage required to set the path forward, quoting from the piece. Another individual here, Rob Murphy, saying it was thoughtful as usual, bang on. We've got Rob Batherson here saying, "Fellow Conservatives, take time to read this post from MP Michelle Rempel Garner," and our friends over at Without Diminishment here talking about it as well. And I could go on and on. There was a lot of people talking about this piece. So before we get into the specifics of it, why did you write it? What were you trying to say? Why do you think it got such a reaction this week?
Okay, well, a lot of questions to unpack there, but I think I'll just for folks who are listening, I'll just reemphasize something you said. We'll throw the link to that article in the video description if you're watching this on video, and if we can, in the podcast description as well, too, if that's possible. Why did I write it? You know why, Sean? You and I have had this conversation a lot over the years. We've been working together for some time now. It's more productive and it takes more effort to be optimistic than it does to be pessimistic. And you and I have been through, we have seen several movies of elections over the years. And, it's natural and human to feel frustration in the best of times and in the worst of times. But um, we have to start with the premise of optimism for the conservative movement in Canada, because there's every reason to be optimistic. And so I wrote it because I was trying to frame out in a constructive way some of the frustrations that I've been hearing from folks since specifically since the Liberals contrived their majority through floor crossing, and then look to the future because there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. And, you know, we are in a country where mainstream broadcast media and to a large extent mainstream quote unquote print media, um, they are now essentially state run. They're state subsidized. They are beholden in a lot of ways to the Liberal government. And a lot of that coverage now is opinion. It's not necessarily fact-based coverage. And a lot of the opinion tends to skew to make conservatives in Canada, and I use conservative in the small c sense, people that share a set of values, are particularly rooted in the concept of freedom. They try to make us feel like, it's over, and that's just not the case objectively by any sort of metric. Now, are there things that we need to look at to address the future? Yeah, but I tried to take a constructive approach to that and build in a bit of a call to action, based on a lot of the things that our team has done and has been successful with over the years, and fellow colleagues that are just incredibly talented in our caucus, but beyond our caucus as well too. Activists that are working hard within the political movement, writers, artists, philanthropists that are trying to create space around this machine that the Liberals have created using state control. Um, and they've created this space in order to further the principles of freedom that we espouse and that we fight for as a right of center movement. So, too long didn't read it. I wanted people to start thinking about the future in a very optimistic way and create an invitation for people to participate in that positive vision for the future.
Yeah, well, I think that that's great, and I think that's partly why it resonated with people. And it is a long piece, but it's not too long that people shouldn't read it. Everybody should go and click on that link to go and check it out. I want to unpack something that you talked about in the piece at one point there. You said there's honor in the duty in being a member of His Majesty's loyal opposition, and democracy requires both government and opposition, but no principle, no matter how strongly held, can be widely implemented from the low ground. Principles without power are just speeches. So in light of what you're talking about there, what were you driving at there? Because that was one of the lines that was like very widely shared with people. It seemed to resonate a lot with people.
Well, the Conservative Party of Canada as a political apparatus exists for one reason, and that's to form government.
Right? Yes.
Like that is the whole premise of a political party or a political movement. It's to further the interests of its members and to form government. Like that's the job, is to win. And you know, I'll say this about my colleagues in my caucus. So many of them, it's like eyes on the prize. It's like, how do we stand up for our constituents, but also build towards a win? There's some folks that are sort of in the broader movement that get, I think, pressure on them from the liberal apparatus to purity test one another when we're largely in the same tent. Now, I will say this. What I appreciate about the right of center movement in Canada is that I find that there is much more ability to play with ideas around a set of broad principles that everybody agrees upon and have vigorous debate about the best path forward, the best policies, the best ways to do things. I've had my mind changed many times over the years, sometimes the hard way on policy, whereas the liberals are more homogenous. But you can't implement principles easily without being in government. Now, you and I have pushed policy from the opposition benches. We have. I would say that the larger conservative movement, a lot of discipline and work from my fellow caucus colleagues, folks broadly in the movement, we've put so much pressure on the federal government that they've had to move slightly, not enough, on immigration, for example. I think about 10 years ago, the work that our small team did on the Yazidi genocide. We changed policy on we've moved laws from the opposition benches, but it's such a heavy lift. And oftentimes in opposition, mostly what you're doing is just trying to stop the bleeding of the Liberal Party. So in order to have a sustainable movement, you need to be in government. Like that needs to be the end goal of a political movement. And it's much easier, having been in government before, with all the levers that you have at your fingertips in your government, the ability to table government legislation, regulations. You've got ministers that are sitting on top of government bureaucracies. It's easier to dictate foreign policy. Those are the things that make, taking the policies and the principles of the right of center movement in Canada a lot easier to implement. And so that has to be the goal, is to win.
Yeah, I love that you framed it out that way, and I think it's important. And I think for people maybe that are not as familiar with the political process, they might be confused by this idea of saying like, well, what do you mean? Of course, the objective is to win, but it's very easy to sometimes lose sight of that objective when you get into these passionate discussions and debates about ideas and policy. And to your point, nobody's saying don't have those. We have to have those, but always within the context and the lens of what is our ultimate objective here in order to implement, which is to win. Because winning's awesome. Like winning's the
It
best.
is. It's great.
And there's a reason why the liberals and others are so focused on that, is because it's great. It's you get to implement all the stuff that you're talking about, and there's nothing better than being on the winning side of a campaign. There just isn't.
And I want to interject here for a second too. Like, I mean, it's imperative for us as the right of center. Why do we want to win? Well, I mean, the country's not in great shape right now. Like, as much as, the CBC might be trying to put a pro-liberal spin on everything and not being objective about the state of play in Canada. I mean, uh, let's start with our file with immigration. They've got Mark Carney out saying immigration's under control. I don't think so. You look at the like cost of groceries. There's a report out this week talking about how most Canadians either can't afford or are buying way less protein, meat, for example. Um, look at free trade might be dead in North America for all intents and purposes. The economy is like sluggish. There was that report about this Canadian National Exhibition there, the 50,000 applications for 5,000 jobs. Like the jobs market is drying up. I could go, you and I could go on and on, but the reality is that the Liberals have been in power for over 10 years. We're on a downward slide on every sort of key performance indicator that would look at success. And a change in government is healthy. It's good. So I look at the reason why we need to win is because that's the best way for me to represent my constituents. Now, am I going to do everything possible for the good people of Calgary Nose Hill, no matter where I sit in the House of Commons? Yes, of course. Any member of parliament can make a difference no matter where they sit in the House. But like winning and putting in place alternative policy that could stop the bleeding on some of these liberal policies that have like set us back for so long. That is a laudable objective for the right of center movement in Canada. And I think to your point, like sometimes we are encouraged by the Liberals and the Liberals' broader political apparatus to shoot at each other as opposed to at them. And I'm not talking about like, internal constructive discussions or constructive criticism that allow us to win. I'm talking about actually trying to destroy one another, just like tearing each other down for people that are generally working in the same direction, then lifting each other up. And that's not optimistic. That's not an action of forward progress or of building.
Yeah, no, I think that the reaction that came out of the piece, nobody took it as this idea of be quiet and fall in line. There's vigorous debate, but you had this line there that said the first step to winning for Canadian Conservatives is believing that winning is possible, and it is. Why is this? Why did you feel like that is the starting point for this conversation?
Well, okay. I'm not sure if a lot of people realize this, but Mark Carney thought he was getting a majority government
Yeah.
on election. He went into election day with his key strategist saying, "You're getting a majority," and he didn't. Now, he contrived it with floor crossing afterwards, which that's a whole other episode. But like the reason why I raise that is that we have a lot of foundations. Just like let's just talk about the party, not as a political movement, right?
Yeah.
You think about the message that was put forward in the last campaign, the discipline around affordability that really resonated with a new voter coalition. And like even, you know, we're objectively some time away from an election right now. Never say never and knock on wood, I guess. But like the reality is we have runway to think about how we build on that voter coalition, how we talk to them as a movement, how we inspire them and win. Like this is not an impossible task. It's like no polling says that that's impossible, particularly with the amount of runway we have in front of us. So the question isn't if, the question is like we're not, you're not sitting like Avi Lewis at like what 5% or something like, hey Avi, but like saying that the NDP are going to form government is a much different conversation than, do the Conservatives have a shot? Of course we have a shot. We've formed government many times before. This is inherently possible. The question is how. And, at this juncture, specifically knowing that it's not likely that there's an election, imminent, what do you do with our time? What is the broader movement? How somebody who is, watching this show today, who is kind of politically active, what can they do to help? What infrastructure are we building? And I think that it's a question of not if, it's a question of how. And I think that's, why I started off with the premise that you just said.
Yeah, I think that that's great, and I think that that underscores, I think, an important differentiator between the conservative movement in this country and those on the left. Is the conservative movement doesn't purport to have any one or group of individuals that has a monopoly on the good ideas
Nope.
in what comes in for where we're supposed to go. It has always been a grassroots driven, from the people, from communities, from those that are impacted day in and day out by government policy. We've taken the lead from them always, and I think that that leads into one of the final points that you were making in your piece. There is when you said the first or the assumption that the tactics and policies that worked 2 decades ago to attract a broad voter coalition will work again in the future. And I think that that was really insightful as you talked about how what worked in politics in the past doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to work today. And you unpack that a bunch in your piece. Maybe if you can unpack that a little bit here now, exactly what you're talking about is why this assumption of tactics and policies that brought people in 2 decades ago, that built the conservative movement under Stephen Harper and others, that might not necessarily be the path forward, and that's okay, and that's a part of this conversation.
So let's start with the fact that you and I are old. Like,
Yeah.
so just for people who are listening, you and I, we were driving around doing some community events earlier this year. And I think I was in the car with you, and I was looking at, like, how your phone produces memories and stuff like that. I'm like, Sean, I think we've been working together for 20 years. And like,
Yeah.
we worked together prior to politics, but like, um, you know, like, the day I got sworn into cabinet under Stephen Harper is what, 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago now. That feels like 5 minutes ago to me. It feels like 5 minutes ago. Like, and I think as you get older, time, the concept of time, it tends to collapse upon itself a little bit, but that's even more so in politics. And, um, in the piece, I talk about how if you and I of right now went back to go and talk to you and I of 2013 when we were getting into cabinet and talked about everything that has happened to the country in the last, 13 years ish, um, we would have thought we were crazy, like, or that we had suffered a psychotic break. And back then, like, the country in 2013, like, if you looked at all the metrics, like, budget was on track to being balanced, very close to being balanced after the 2008 financial crisis. Per capita GDP was basically mirroring the US. There was a lot of economic growth. There was no delta there between our two countries. We weren't talking about inflation as the problem it is. The Liberals hadn't effectively legalized drugs yet. We didn't have the fentanyl crisis on the streets. We didn't have mass immigration. We didn't have integration issues. We didn't have, kinetic war happening. The pandemic and all the craziness around that hadn't happened. So what I'm trying to say is, like, boring and steady as she goes in 2013 was the right approach for that time. It was absolutely the right approach. Incremental approach in 2013 was the right approach.
Hmm.
But that's not necessarily the right approach today. Because what happened in 2015 was the Liberals came in and they aggressively and boldly implemented essentially their farther left, their socialist or full socialist, depending on how you look at it, agenda over the next 10 years. So, like, for us, we're going to have to counter a decade of that policy and the ashes that the country find itself in with boldness, right? And that doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice our principles, but it probably means that we rethink about how we're approaching our conversation with our voter coalition on certain issues. And we've started to do that. I don't want to sound like we haven't been doing that. A lot of some of the dialogue that was happening in the 2025 campaign, like, credit to everybody involved in that, like we've started it, but now we need to do more of it. And, sometimes in some discourse, especially from colleagues that haven't participated in the political process in a meaningful way since 2013, 2014, like there's this, and God bless them, like there's nothing wrong with it. It's good to have a check on boldness as well too, but there's always this like pull back, this is too bold, this is too much. And that is not what I'm hearing, especially from the new generation of activists, of writers, of colleagues that are under 35 that are going, man, like I'm thinking about what the country looks like for my kids. And, I think that that's important. But, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this on today's episode, but for me,
Yeah.
that leads into the last part of it, which was, what do we do? And, this is why for me, the call to action was an invitation for people to build out the broader conservative infrastructure in the country, which I think you've been very active in as well, too.
Yeah, and I think that the where do we go and how do we respond is the important part of this conversation, because the movement at large, I think, has to respond exactly like you're saying, with boldness, but with the same level of urgency and desperation that when you go out and talk to people in the community, that they're articulating to us about why the change is necessary, why this different direction is there. And to your point, they're not asking for gentle incremental adjustments to their life. They're saying, my house is on fire and I need you guys to do something about it, right?
Yes.
And so it's not a call for, we'd like you to kind of take a soft approach to this. That people are asking for bold vision. They're asking for different type of leadership, and so to respond to that is necessary. And so yeah, so where do we go from here? I think you were talking about a variety of different ideas and things in your piece. A lot of, like you said, is already starting to be put in place. Organizations and infrastructure across the country that are responding to the need and the challenge at hand. There are groups that are already setting up to go out into institutions like post-secondary
Yep.
institutions to talk to students, to establish opportunities for conversation, debate, dialogue, things of that nature. I mentioned at the front end, like our friends at Without Diminishment, there are all sorts of great independent journalists and media organizations that have started and are carving out a path in the midst of a very challenging ecosystem of media entities that are bought and paid for by the federal government and are not providing objective journalism in this country by and large. And I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, because there are great journalists that are doing great work, but there are independents that are really staking out an important part of
Yeah.
the ecosystem here that is necessary for the small c conservative movement to operate. And so you presented a variety of not only ideas, because to your point, a lot of this is already happening, and that's where this message of hope comes for people. But why do you think that is so important as a part of the next steps for this?
Because it's a constructive thing to do. It's that constructive part of optimism, right? I mean, one of the best things of our movement, like just to reemphasize, is like we have diversity of thought in the movement. There's a lot of similarities and alignment on broad principles that are, directly oppose um, some of the liberals, more disastrous socialist policies. But there's a diversity of opinion on how to get there, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
So, the question is like, how do you have that conversation in a constructive way? How do you engage people into that broader conversation? And it's everything that you just talked about, right? We need to build the infrastructure. Part of what I talked about in the essay was the liberals do everything possible to signal the virtue of their movement and the opposite of ours, where it's flipped for me. And it's
Mm.
flipped in a lot of places around the world. But when you look at where it's flipped in other places around the world in a constructive way, and in democracies, there's an entire ecosystem for right of center thinkers, to enter into that ecosystem and play with ideas, be successful professionally, no matter what, and signal that this is a positive, thing. And Canadians should be like, if somebody's listening to this and you're like, I am a liberal and I would love conservatives to never exist. Well, you're essentially arguing for an authoritarian state where there's no diversity of thought, there's no accountability of government, and we need that tension, to preserve a democracy in Canada. Otherwise, like, it's just not. So, you know, uh, just to reemphasize, like, this is why we need hundreds of right of center credible media outlets, hundreds of writers I talk about the need for independent awards organizations, because the Liberals have really taken a stranglehold over awards organizations in Canada. Dinners, salons, book clubs. We need cultural heroes, singers, songwriters, poets, sports heroes, scientists coming out and talking about ideas that hold the government to account and that advance the conservative policy and movement in a way that allows us to pave that runway with the electorate to win. It's got to be an all hands on deck thing. So back to the front end of my rant here is that it's okay to have a conversation with someone else within our broader movement where you might not 100% align on principles. It doesn't mean that, not sorry, not principles, on idea, on policy implementation, on path forward. Like, that's okay. I mean, you and I have had massive cataclysmic policy fights with folks within the movement. But like, I think today that, like, people be like, okay, she had a point, and I'll be like, oh, well, they had a point, clearly, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And so I know that this is a lot of context to say the Liberals love it when we try to, our senior operatives try to kill each other, because then
Mhm.
we have less generals in the field. And, I think it is really important that rather than just, like, yes, of course, focusing on the political party and, like, all of the apparatus around it is important. We also need to build out that infrastructure
Well,
and,
I think that's exactly what you're saying is the party and the members of parliament and the leadership within the partisan big C Conservative Party, yes, is necessary, but it can't be the only mechanism for advancing this type of change that you're talking about. We need the broader infrastructure and organizations across the board in order to support it, from a variety of different angles. And to your point too, yes, the liberals and those on the left, they absolutely want to suck all the oxygen out of the room so that there isn't an ability for this type of conversation or for this type of organization to begin to grow. And we're seeing it despite all the hurdles that they put up, to prevent people from doing this. We are seeing that movement happening already. We need to foster it, encourage it, and as conservatives, we need to be, to your point, making sure that there are not a couple but dozens, hundreds of individuals and
yes,
organizations that are putting forward these types of conversations and ideas, because it is necessary not only for democracy, but it is the right thing to do
yeah.
for
And it's
Canadians.
fun. And it's fun. Like,
Yes.
one of the greatest things that I've seen, and you talk about being optimistic and can we win? Well, you just look at all of the growth on the broader macro infrastructure across the country over the last year. There really is a renaissance happening. It's really exciting. And I think that, there might be some folks that are like, okay, well, where do I fit in? What does this mean? I want to say this very clearly. A rising tide lift all boats. There is more than enough glory to go around. There is, like, just go out and do something helpful, right? Like, invitation. And for those, like, that's how I close the essay, was for those of you folks that are out there doing that right now. Thank you. It makes our lives easier. And I choose to be optimistic and to build. And I know, like, there are so many people who feel the same way, across our caucus, across the broader infrastructure. And I think what gets highlighted too in, like liberal media vehicles, liberal hosted podcasts, liberal hosted news aggregators, the CBC, is the pot shots that aren't indicative of the broader movement. They're just not. Like, that's not what I'm seeing on the ground. The fight is there, and the why of the movement is instilled in so many people. So I just want to close with that. I think much needed, not Pollyanna-ish. Like, look, there are frustrations, but they're fixable. Like they are, and
Let me
it's worth doing the fight. It's worth having the fight. It is. Like, let's go, giddy up, like
so
onward. You know.
So let me ask you this in closing then. So for somebody that is watching or listening today that says that maybe they've not been involved in the political process, but they identify within what you are talking about here about these conservative principles and ideas, and they have something to offer in one of these categories that you're talking about, or they want to get involved. Where where do they go? How do you want to hear from them? How do you want people to that are listening today that say, yeah, I'm ready there. Giddy up, Michelle. I'm ready. Put me in, coach. Where do you want them to go? What do you want them to do?
Okay, I've been talking way too much. You're the veteran political strategist. I'm going to dump that on you, and then I'll answer.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing that I want people to do is I want them to reach out to you and I here to tell us those ideas. Like I said, nobody's got a monopoly on ideas, on thoughts, on ways that they can get involved. So the best way for them to do that, we've already pumped it at the beginning, but go to Michelle's Substack. The link is there. Go subscribe. There's an email there that you can send an email and connect with Michelle. And whether it's just a one-off thought or it's a desire to get involved in this broader coalition building that Michelle is talking about, go ahead and do that. If you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook or any other channel, you can put comments right in there. But the best way to
Yeah,
stay in touch with Michelle is to go and subscribe so that you can directly communicate with email, and
and we
she can
do.
communicate with you.
We take feedback from, our riding, from folks across the country all the time. It's super helpful in knowing where to grow. And I would say the same thing is true for, you know, anybody who has a conservative MP. Reach out to your MP, but it's broader than that too. There are a lot of organizations that are, growing conservative writers, conservative commentators, talking about conservatism, right of center artists. You think about, like, I know it's not necessarily Canada, but like there's this whole online conversation about the role of like country music, and why is country music so popular right now. I think about someone like, shout out to our friend in Alberta, Scott Hardy, who is like this world-renowned silversmith who, you talks about Western cowboy culture. Ingrid, who runs the Western Oasis art exhibit in Calgary, and the like the reflection of Western Canadian heritage and freedom, and like all of these things that are like, they're not a political movement there, but they're espousing the principles that we
Yeah, I was
want
thinking
to protect,
about
right? Like,
Brett Kissel with some of the music that he's putting out
yes,
there.
it's just engage, build, right. um like you can just do helpful things, and doing a helpful thing doesn't mean like doom spiraling on X. There's things to do, and I'm not saying like, we should shy away from having discussions on how to fix frustrations, but like, then there's the actual doing things to fix frustrations that are helpful too. And there are so many people in our party, in the broader movement, that are doing that right now. And I just wanted to make sure that while the liberal machine has spent, I think a lot of time fixating on a very narrow and very small group of like public fighting, that there's so many people, like, you think about some of the people in our caucus, like you had Alex Ruff's comment on the start of this segment. Alex is like an unsung hero in the conservative movement. He's got, military history, he's service history, he does all sorts of stuff on national security. He works so hard, and like there's so many people who are doing positive things and they're not getting the CBC breathless David Cochrane panel. Of course they wouldn't. Why would they do that? So, what can people do? Just do helpful things, whatever interests you, however you think you can build. And I know I'm kind of rambling now, but the point being is that there's a lot to do. And I think for both of us, it's an invitation to just do helpful things. Let's go, you know?
I love it. Let's go.
Yeah.
Do helpful things, and you're not alone. There are a lot of people. Like I said, this is not a start from scratch. This is not from 0 to 60. We are well along the way, and like we said, we've given countless examples here already today of individuals and organizations that are already doing this. There is opportunity at every level in every region of the country to begin getting involved if you haven't already. And so do helpful things. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Awesome. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.